Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from and hit that like button. You won't believe the insane level of entitlement and criminal impersonation I dealt with right outside my own house. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of perfect late spring day in coastal California where the air smells of jasmine and salt, and the light hits just right, turning the palm fronds into emerald green fans. I just finished a brutal 14-hour shift at the naval base, the kind that leaves you mentally drained but physically wired. All I wanted was a hot shower, cold beer, and the blissful silence of my own home in the exclusive gated community of the canyons at Sunset Cove. This neighborhood with its manicured lawns and faux Tuscan villas felt like a world away from the grit and danger of my actual job, which for those who don't know is serving as a chief petty officer in the U.S. Navy SEAL teams. I was still in my fatigues, the heavy-duty worn-in kind, though I'd stripped off the plate carrier and most of the heavy gear back on base, but the boots were laced tight and the look was unmistakable. I was military and I was tired. I drove my personal, unmarked Tacoma, which was admittedly a little dusty from a recent off-road training excursion, past the stone columns of the main gate where the actual security guard, a nice older gentleman named Frank, gave me a weary nod. Everything was normal. I turned the corner onto Willow Creek Lane, the street where I lived, and immediately saw the visual anomaly that snapped my tired mind to attention. There were two figures standing next to a beat-up, unmarked Crown Victoria parked right in the middle of the street, partially blocking the flow of traffic. They weren't cops. They weren't actual security. They were two overweight men in poorly fitting, mismatched pseudo-uniforms that looked like they were purchased from a low-budget military surplus store. One was wearing a khaki BDU shirt with what looked like a cheap, embroidered patch on the shoulder that said HOA Patrol, and the other, the larger one with the badly shaved head, was wearing a black tactical vest that was clearly for show, straining around his massive gut. They were standing by my neighbor's perfectly pristine Ford F-150, one of them aggressively pointing a cheap plastic clipboard at the truck's windshield. My first thought wasn't anger but a quiet, professional assessment: suspicious activity, non-standard uniforms, attempting to detain without clear authority. I pulled my Tacoma over to the curb about 50 feet away and put it in park, watching the bizarre, entitled little power trip unfold. The guy in the black vest, we'll call him Vest Guy, turned his attention from the neighbor's truck and spotted me, or more accurately, he spotted the deep green non-regulation color of my truck and the tired, but still imposing figure in fatigues sitting behind the wheel. He straightened up, puffed out his chest, and started walking toward me with a ridiculously exaggerated self-important swagger, the cheap rubber soles of his knockoff tactical boots squeaking on the smooth asphalt. His partner, Clipboard Guy, stayed back, looking nervous but still trying to maintain an air of authority by holding his cheap clipboard like a shield. I took a deep breath, already feeling the blood pressure starting to climb. I knew this type instantly, someone desperate for a taste of power, willing to abuse any perceived authority no matter how fake to feel superior. I rolled down my window, intending to ask calmly what the issue was, giving him a chance to de-escalate this theatrical farce before it got stupid, but he didn't wait for a polite opening. "You pull your vehicle over completely and show me your community parking permit now," Vest Guy barked, leaning down and peering aggressively into my truck cab, his breath smelling faintly of cheap cologne and microwaved hot dogs. His tone wasn't just authoritative, it was challenging, a direct and unnecessary confrontation that immediately pushed my buttons. I looked him dead in the eye and kept my voice level, the tone carefully neutral, the one I use when I'm trying to keep things from escalating to a physical level when dealing with an unstable subject. "This is my residence, sir. I am parked on the side of a residential street legally. What is the actual infraction you're citing, or do you have a genuine reason to block traffic?" I asked, putting the emphasis on actual and genuine. I watched his face contort with instant, petty rage at the simple question, the kind of frustration people feel when their assumed authority is questioned. He wasn't used to being talked to like a rational adult. He was used to intimidating little old ladies and overworked commuters. "Don't get smart with me, pal. This community is governed by the covenants and I am here to enforce them. Your truck is non-compliant with the color and size regulations. It's dirty and oversized for the community aesthetic. Show me your identification and registration immediately, or I'm calling the real police to have you towed for failure to comply with a lawful order." He spat, his face getting blotchy and red. Lawful order. I almost laughed right in his face. The absurdity of it was staggering. This guy was literally trying to use the law enforcement jargon I actually operate under to intimidate me, a man who carries the weight of multiple real-world deployments and highly classified missions. I shook my head slowly, the weariness draining away, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple misunderstanding. I was dealing with a full-blown narcissist suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I needed to handle him like a low-level threat, firm, uncompromising, and absolutely correct on procedure. I was in my neighborhood on my street, and this fool was attempting to detain me illegally. I reached slowly for the door handle, an intentional, deliberate movement that was meant to be a warning. Sir, you are not a police officer, you are not a sworn deputy. You have no right to demand my ID or registration, nor do you have the authority to tow a legally parked vehicle on a public roadway within a private community, I stated, my voice dropping an octave, losing all trace of casual politeness and becoming the low, resonant tone of command. I suggest you take a very large step back from my vehicle, remove your illegally parked car from the middle of the street, and cease impersonating a peace officer, which, by the way, is a felony in this state. That's when the situation went from ridiculously irritating to genuinely dangerous. Veskai's eyes went wide, not with fear but with an instant, blind fury. His hand, shaking slightly, went straight to his hip, where he had a cheap nylon holster, the kind that screams airsoft more than actual firearm, tucked into the belt of his baggy tactical pants. He was actually going for it. Movement was slow, clumsy, and completely telegraphed, but the implications were immediate and utterly terrifying. The wannabe security guard was reaching for a weapon. My internal clock didn't just speed up. It went into a different dimension entirely, the one where milliseconds feel like minutes and every single variable is processed with terrifying clarity. I saw the cheap holster, the way his fat fingers fumbled with the retention strap, the look of maniacal, committed rage on his face. This wasn't a bluff. This guy was so far gone on his power trip that he was genuinely prepared to escalate this completely unnecessary encounter to lethal force over a dirty truck and a challenge to his fake authority. I had barely moved, still seated in the cab, but my hand was already resting lightly on the cold, solid grip of the tool I always kept accessible under the driver's seat. A highly specialized, non-lethal defensive implement that, in a split-second crisis, was far faster and more effective than reaching for my legally stored sidearm in the secure lockbox. "Stop, do not touch that weapon," I commanded, the sound of my voice cutting through the evening air like a sonic boom. It was the same tone I've used to issue tactical commands in firefights, the tone that demands immediate, absolute obedience, and for a split second it froze him. But the look of pure, entitled malice returned just as quickly, and he ripped the weapon from the holster. It was a handgun, black, clearly visible, and pointed directly at my chest, through the open window of my truck. Clipboard guy, standing 20 feet away by the neighbor's truck, let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp, dropping his useless clipboard, which clattered loudly on the pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, but now there was a small, gathering audience. Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down, out watering his prize-winning roses, dropped his hose. Mrs. Chen from across the street stopped walking her little terrier and froze, her hand flying to her mouth. The air was suddenly thick with panic, the smell of jasmine replaced by the metallic scent of fear and the acrid, stale sweat radiating off of Vestguy. "You think you're so smart, Mr. Military. You think your little army uniform gives you the right to disrespect community authority. I have the right to defend myself from a threat," Vestguy shrieked, his voice cracking with the strain of the lie, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the shocked witnesses. He was trembling not with control but with adrenaline and uncontrolled rage, which made the gun in his hand infinitely more dangerous. I knew with a bone-deep certainty that this man had absolutely zero training, zero control, and if I made one wrong move he would pull the trigger purely by reflex. My training kicked in, the decades of conditioning that allow me to remain completely calm while facing down lethal threats. My mind was moving with the clarity of a supercomputer, assessing distance, trajectory, cover, and the best path to immediate disarmament and control. I was facing an active shooter scenario, not an HOA dispute, and my primary directive was to neutralize the threat with minimal collateral damage, starting with myself. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I didn't even look at the gun. I looked Vestguy directly in the eye, and the expression on my face changed completely. The fatigue and irritation vanished, replaced by a look of cold, predatory focus, the thousand-yard stare that comes from seeing real violence. I let the silence hang for a terrifying beat, and then I spoke, my voice a low, chilling whisper that somehow cut through the neighborhood's stunned silence. "You have exactly 3 seconds to drop the weapon. You have just committed brandishing, assault with a deadly weapon, and felony impersonation. Your actions are being recorded and your life is about to become a living hell." 3. I didn't need to look down to know my non-lethal tool was already in my hand, ready to deploy. I saw the flash of doubt in his eyes. My absolute, unblinking calm was clearly not the reaction he was expecting from his victim. He was expecting compliance or terror, not this terrifying, immediate counterthreat spoken with absolute authority. 2. I shifted my body weight infinitesimally, a subtle, almost unnoticeable movement, but it was enough to signal that I was preparing to move fast, faster than he could react. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second, screaming, "Drop your hands, get out of the truck now," his voice reaching a new, panicked pitch. That's when the tactical training override I carry kicked in. I didn't move my hands, I didn't get out of the truck. Instead, I leaned in slightly, and with a voice that was pure cold steel, I delivered the line that was about to shatter his pathetic little fantasy and save my life. My name is Chief Petty Officer, and I am the resident of 1242 Willow Creek. You just pointed a gun at an active-duty United States Navy SEAL. You are now detained. The words weren't a challenge, they were a declaration of war, and they hit him with the force of a concrete block. The moment the title, United States Navy SEAL, left my lips, the entire scene fractured. Veskai's eyes went wide, the color draining from his face, leaving behind a sickly ashen hue. It wasn't just the words, it was the way I said them, the absolute and terrifying confidence of a man who lives and breathes the reality of lethal force every single day, not a play-acting mall cop. The handgun, which a second ago had been held with the desperate conviction of a scared bully, wavered violently in his grasp. He looked down at the fatigues I was wearing, not just the faded green color but the subtle cut, the way they were worn, and then back to my eyes, realizing with dawning horror that the man he was threatening was not just another homeowner. He was the real deal, someone who could neutralize his threat before his brain could even process the word mistake. The witnesses on the street, Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Chen, started murmuring, the low sounds of their shock amplifying the tension. What? That's a lie, HOA rules, he stammered, the last vestiges of his bravado crumbling into dust. He looked pathetic, his attempt at an aggressive stance collapsing inward, the tactical vest now looking less like armor and more like a ridiculous, ill-fitting costume. I didn't give him a chance to recover or rationalize his stupidity. My hand shot out, not toward the gun but toward the radio clipped to his shoulder, a cheap walkie-talkie style device he was probably using to talk to his nervous partner. I snatched it with a surgeon's precision and spoke into it, bypassing the need for a phone and going straight for an undeniable authority. This is CPO, call sign Stingray. I am in an active situation at 1242 Willow Creek. I have one subject detained and under control. But he is in possession of a firearm. I require immediate deployment of local law enforcement and naval security forces to my location. I repeat, armed subject detained, need immediate response. My voice was calm, professional, and military grade, a sound that instantly cut through the fake authority static. The sheer, undeniable gravity of the words Stingray and the call for naval security forces, not just the local PD, was the final nail in the coffin of his delusion. Veskai completely folded. His hand went limp and the handgun, a cheap, polymer-framed 9 fully loaded, clattered noisily onto the floor of my truck cab. I moved faster than he could blink, reaching across, pulling the keys from his own Crown Victoria's ignition and tossing them into the dense bougainvillea bush across the street. Hands on your head. Now, face the vehicle, I ordered, stepping out of my truck with the kind of smooth, economical movement that only years of highly specialized training can teach. I stood over him, my sheer presence radiating the kind of disciplined, controlled violence that doesn't need to shout. Clipboard guy, seeing his partner's total capitulation, simply put his hands up and backed away, leaning against the neighbor's truck in defeat. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights and escalating consequences. Local police cruisers arrived first, sirens wailing, followed swiftly by a less conspicuous, dark blue SUV carrying 2 extremely serious-looking officers from the Naval Base Provost Marshal's office. I had already secured the weapon and the subject, vest guy kneeling on the asphalt, weeping hysterically, the absurdity of his HOA patrol patch contrasting sharply with the very real, very serious felony charges he was facing. I handed the weapon to the lead patrol officer, presented my actual Navy ID, and provided a brief, factual account of the attempted illegal detention, felony brandishing, and impersonation. The naval officers took point on the impersonation charge and the firearm, given the threat was aimed at active military personnel, which added an extra layer of federal seriousness to his already awful day. As they cuffed him, Veskai kept screaming about his rights and his authority, and how the HOA board would back him up, but his words were hollow, ringing with the panic of a fantasy man meeting cold, hard reality. The officers informed him calmly but firmly that impersonating a police officer while drawing a loaded weapon on someone regardless of the victim's profession was an express ticket to state prison, and doing it to a SEAL just meant the prosecutor would be even less forgiving. Later, I learned Veskai had bought the fake HOA patrol vest and badges online and had no actual security license or legal standing whatsoever. He was just a disgruntled community member who had been passed over for a spot on the board. Clipboard guy was just a nervous accomplice and was let go with a stern warning and a citation for illegal parking. The HOA board, mortified by the ensuing media coverage, which let me tell you went absolutely viral, issued a formal, groveling apology, disbanded the entire patrol program immediately, and fired the entire management company responsible for hearing these clowns. They also offered to cover all legal costs, which I politely declined, preferring to let the system handle the fool. I watched vest guy get loaded into the back of a patrol car, his head hanging low, his tactical vest and his life completely ruined by his own pathetic entitlement. Justice, in this case, wasn't just served, it was delivered by the swift, professional hand of the US Navy. Never forget that the line between a real hero and a fake is not a uniform or a badge you bought online, but the genuine authority, discipline, and commitment to law and honor you carry in your heart. Don't let petty tyrants get away with impersonation or abuse. If you like this story of justice and accountability, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable HK stories.